Okay, I am now going to demonstrate how to start to measure our intersecting points and transfer our image over into our reference, from our reference grid into our drawing grid, okay? So this is where I really like to use the paper instead of making, measurements with numbers and dividing and adding and all of that to get my 1.5 times the length of all of these measurements. I am going to use my paper just like I did to create my larger grid box, okay? We are gonna start and we're gonna go around the ear right here. So I'm gonna need, my first point that I wanna plot is this one, where this ear crosses this grid line, okay? So in order to measure, I would line the corner of my paper up with the corner of the grid, and then I will line the edge of the paper up with the edge of the grid line, okay? And then I will make a little mark right where that line of his ear intersects, okay? That's one length of the grid line. And then I'm gonna slide over. Since I was on this line of the grid, I need to be on this line of this grid, and I need to line it up exactly the way that I did over here, okay? So the corner of my paper in the corner of the grid and have it line up with the line, okay? So here, a very light mark on my grid, there's 1 time the length, and then to get half, I will just fold my paper in half to this line that I've drawn, okay? So that is now half the length. And then I will add that. Now I have 1.5 times the length of this. And that is where my ear is gonna intersect this line. Now, I like to erase out the extra line because I don't want it to confuse me, but here's my first reference point. Now, I wanna draw this section of the line right here. So this is my next reference point where the ear touches this line. So it doesn't really intersect that line, but it touches right here. So right in the middle where it touches, that's gonna be my next reference point. So I unfold my paper and I erase out any old line that I have so that it does not confuse my situation. Now, I wanna know where it touches on this line, so I'm going to line my paper up with that line. And I'm gonna put the corner here in the corner and I'm gonna make it even with this line. Here's my point where my ear touches. So I'm gonna put a little line right there, okay? You can kind of see that. Now, this is the line I lined up with, so this is the line that we need to line up with over here. It needs to be the exact same one. I'm gonna place the corner of my paper in that corner, and then I want this line of my paper to line up with the line of the grid. So I'm gonna very lightly mark the length, 1 time the length, and then I'm gonna fold this in half so I can get half that length. And I'm going to add half the length again. So I have 1.5 times the length, and this is where my ear should touch this line. Again, I'm gonna erase out that extra mark so that I don't get confused, all right? Now I'm gonna unfold my paper, whoops. Erase off any old marks for my next measurement. So I can now connect these 2 points. And what I am going to do is I'm gonna trace this line a couple of times back and forth. Gives me some muscle memory of the arc of the line and how it should be. Then I'm gonna come over here and very, very lightly, I'm gonna do the same thing. It's super light, and I'm gonna keep it super light. But now I have that line in there. I have it in there nice and light, so if I need to adjust it or erase it, I can, but it's there, okay? So as I'm coming along this line, I'm gonna continue along the line to the next spot that it intersects the grid, which is right here. So that is the next spot that I need to measure. It is on this line. So I am going to place my corner of my paper at the corner of the line. Then I'm going to make sure that the paper lines up with the line, and I'm gonna come here where the line intersects, the image intersects that grid line, and I'm gonna make a mark. since it's this line, I need to line my paper up with the same exact line on my drawing grid, okay? So I put the corner in the corner, I line the paper up with the line, and now I'm going to make a very light mark because that's my one-time mark. I'm going to fold this little section of paper in half so I can get a half of that distance. And I'm going to add half. So now I have 1.5 times the length of this right here. So this is now where my ear the line will connect, okay? I'm gonna erase out this extra line so we don't get confused. And now I'm going to trace this line. There's a slight arc and it arcs down to this, all right? So I'm gonna do that. I want it to feel smooth. We don't want it to feel choppy, so I kind of run through there and smooth it out. And that's part of why I keep it really, really light, because once I get the entire outline of my donkey drawn out, then I can smooth it all out and I can make sure all my proportion is good and laid out and everything's good. And then I would go back and I will add in all of the little detail things that are on here, all of his little seam lines, his eyes, his hair, you know, all those little details, all the little wrinkles and things. I'm not gonna worry about any of those for now. I'm just gonna get the proportion and the outline in first, okay? So from here, if I was to continue this line, we run into hair. So the hair is a detail, and the hair will take some time to put all of that in. So what I would suggest is that you take the line and continue on the line of his head and continue that around smooth, okay? You can kind of see it reflecting there. That's the line you're gonna draw. We will come back later and we will add in the hair and put in all that effort of the hair once we know that we have the outline and everything in correctly, okay? That way, if we have to erase and change, we're not putting in a bunch of work here and then having to erase and change. So get in the habit of doing your basic outline, your basic shape, and then going back after the entire thing is in and starting to add in the detail, okay? So as we follow this line up, and it curves around and it touches right there, that is our next intersecting point in the grid. So that is the point that we need to measure right there. So we'll take my paper, make sure it's all unfolded, make sure I erase any old marks off of it. And now the intersection is on this vertical line. So I'm going to put my straight edge into the corner there, run it down with the line. And then I'm going to draw my little line right where that line would intersect. So if I was to follow this up, exactly where it would keep going onto the paper, that's where I'm going to draw my line. Now, because I was on this vertical line, I need to be on this vertical line up here. So line it up in the corner, make sure it's lined up with the line, make a very light mark right here for the 1, and then I'm going to, again, fold this in half, and you need to make sure that you get your in half pretty precise. Smush it down and add the half. Okay, so now we have 1.5 times the length, and this is going to be where my line is going to intersect. So again, I like to erase out the extra line so that I don't get confused, and then I'm going to come through here and I'm going to trace this arc of this line so that I kind of know how I want it. And then I can come through and I can start to put that in. Now, if I feel like I'm worried about how it's coming, I can kind of double check how far out from the line is it supposed to be. The line comes out that far from the line. I can come and check that, ×2. Maybe I'm not quite as close as I'd like to be. This kind of comes and then tucks, so I want to smooth these things out. And I can do that while this is nice and light. And then I can come in with an eraser. I actually like this little precision eraser, but you can use your pencil eraser or whatever that you have, and you can kind of start to smooth out your line just a little. I wouldn't get too worried about it because you can come back in and you'll be darkening your line and correcting it more and more as you go through, okay? But the farther the distance and the more curve there is to it, the more you might have to tweak it a little bit, okay? So now we're here. Our next line, if we follow our image, is right there. So this will be our next intersection that we need to measure to. It runs along this line. So I'm going to make sure to unfold my paper, erase out my old line here. And because we're on this line, that is the one I'm going to line up to. I'm going to place the corner in the corner, make sure it lines up on the line nice and evenly. And then right where that line intersects, that's where I'm going to continue the line onto the paper, okay? Now, it's this line, so we're going to go to this diagonal line. We're going to line her up right in the corner of that. Make sure that the paper lines up with the line. There's our mark, nice and light, because it's only the one time. Fold it in half. Add our half. Now we have 1.5 times the distance, and this is where our line is going to intersect. Erase out my extra line. And now I'm going to look here and I'm going to see that this kind of curves just a touch at the end. And that's what I'm going to do. And again, nice and light so that as I need to adjust it, I can adjust it as we go, okay? Now it's going to curve down to this spot. That's my next intersecting point. So that is where I'm going to measure to. So again, unfold your paper, erase out the old line. Now, I will start turning because I want to measure the shorter distance, and I like, again, to hold and draw in the same general position because that's where I have the most control. So I place that in the corner, line it up with the edge of my line, and then I will make a little mark to this side. And this does loop down below the line a little bit, so I will have to keep that in mind as I'm putting this in. But it's going to come there. And then we're going to fold our paper in half to the line. Add that half. Now I have 1.5 times. That's where we want the ear to come down to. Erase out that extra line. Now, in this case, for me, I prefer to go ahead and plot out, since we're just gonna cap that, I'll plot out the other side of that ear right now, okay? And come in and put that in too. So here's one time, and I will fold that in half. Yeah. Okay, add it. And this is where our ear will curl back up at. Okay, so as I look at my image and I trace over how it's going to curve, that's it. One little line at a time. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to do that curve. Okay, and then I have just this little bit of a tip of my ear right there. And now I've got that line and the little curve here. Now I need, if I follow this line back up, it's going to come around and it's going to intersect right there. So that's the next spot I need to measure. So again, unfold my paper, erase out my old line. And I'm going to measure from this corner. And there is the length on this line where the line will intersect, okay? Now, it's this diagonal line, so I need to do it on this diagonal line. Oh, you know what? We already did that point. I'm sorry. We are measuring this point before I confuse you. I am going to redraw that for the inside of the ear because we already have the outside of the ear. We need the inside. Okay, inside of the ear. All right, same line. One time. Fold less than half. Okay. Add half to that length. So now we have 1.5, and this is where our ear is going to cross. Trace out that extra. Now, when I trace this line, it's a very slight little S curve in there. Okay, nice and light. Now I have that. Okay. So the line continues up and then it transitions right here. Okay, so this is a point that we are gonna need to measure out. However, if you notice, it does not intersect a grid anywhere. So that makes it a little more difficult for us to measure where that is. We have to measure this point right here with a 2-measure system, okay? So what that means, I'm gonna take the edge of my paper and I'm gonna line it up to this line because it's very close to that line. And I'm gonna line it up with that spot. And then I'm gonna draw a line out to the grid line. Okay? You can see that. So now I can measure down to this spot and then out to this spot, okay? So first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna line our straight edge up because we need the spot on this line. Line it up, and I'm gonna make the mark, okay? So now we need to get to that mark on this line of my drawing grid. So 1.5. Okay, so this is the mark we now need to measure in from. Now, if you'll notice, when I drew this line, I lined the end up with this grid line. And I do that on purpose so I can get the angle correct, okay? When I go to measure in from this line, I need the angle correct. And here's my mark for where that point is. That's the distance out. So I line the end up with that line just like I did over there. I slide it down to my little mark here. And then there is my 1 length. And then I need to add half a length. So now I have 1.5. And that's where my ear needs to come up to. And if I look here, it curves. So again, I want to smooth that out because we don't want it to be all choppy. And that's how far up my ear will come on that side, okay? So now, if you're gonna look to where the line goes again, it comes back down and we need to find that spot on our grid. So again, open up my paper, erase out my old line. We're looking for an intersection on this line, so I will line it up on this line. And right here is where his face continues with continue. Now I will bring it and line it up on the same line. There's 1. Fold that distance in half. And add it. And it's right here, okay? That's where my face line now needs to curve, and it follows the curve of his ear and comes right down to that spot. Okay? So the next thing, if I follow this around, it curves out and it comes to right here. We're gonna follow around the face, okay? And then close out the ear on the other side. So it's gonna bump out and it's gonna come back and it's gonna come right here. So that is the next point that I can measure. So this is the line of the intersection right here. So I line it up with this line, putting the corner at the edge, and then I draw the little line right here by his face where it crosses the line. And then I put it on the same line on my grid over here, nice and light for the one time. Fold her in half, add the half. Okay, so now, we can see right here is where our face needs to come down, but if you see it curves out and goes in, this is like a smile line. So one of the things I could do, I could smooth this out as a line, okay? Nice and curved. So that's what I'm gonna do. And then I want to add out in the bump, and the bump comes down. It's almost triangular, and so probably right in here and probably right in here, and then I'm gonna add in that area. Okay, and I'm just gonna leave it right like that as I continue on. Actually, one of the things I want to note, I want to show, see how close to the ear it is? So it probably actually is going to come out more like this. And one of the things I can do to check that is I can come right in the middle and see how wide it is. Now I have an old line here, so let's erase that off. Right in the middle and see how wide it is out from his face, okay? And then I can come in and I can double check that. And it's too wide, so I can bring it down and just adjust it. Until I'm happy with the way that it looks. The other thing that I can do is I can measure the length of the bump out here, and I can double check that. And half, so it should be a little bit longer. Okay, so now I've kind of can put that in like that, okay? And now, if I follow, this is just a pretty easy curve from this line to that one, so now I need this point. So I'm going to come up here, erase off an old line, put that in the corner, line it up with the line, because this is the line I'm looking for my intersection. And I'm gonna put in a mark right there. And I'm gonna come to the same exact line. Here's my light one-time line. Fold this in half. Once I have it folded down flat, then I can come in and I can add it in. Okay, so that is the intersection that I need to curve his mouth down to. Okay, so I would do the curve here, trace over it a couple of times, and then kind of come and do the curve here. And then I will continue and I will keep doing that across these next two, okay? So the next intersection is right here. It's on this vertical line, so that's the one I'm gonna mark. Mark it. Here's my one time. Fold her in half. smash it down. There's my 1.5. So 1.5 times the length, okay? This curves up right here, so we will now curve this up. Keep it smooth. Now the next one is right here on this diagonal line. So I'm going to line it up on the diagonal, putting the corner in the corner, make my mark right there. Go to the same diagonal line. Stay off camera here. There we go. Same diagonal line, bring it down, nice light mark for my 1 time, fold it in half, add the half. There's where the rest of my mouth will come through. I always trace my line before I draw it. Muscle memory helps you get the right arc in there. Now you can see it's a little bit disjointed, so I will smooth it out just a touch. All right, so again, right here, there's gonna be this bump out again. I like to put it in with a smooth line and then add the bump out, okay? So we're going to come across on this horizontal line right here is where the smooth line would come through. And then I'm gonna measure out there. There's 1. And half. And that's where I'm gonna connect to. And then it kind of comes on up and it crosses right here. And I'm gonna go ahead and finish that out before I add the bump out, because the bump out goes on both sides of this, okay? So on my next intersections on the diagonal line, I will line this up on the diagonal line. I will put my line here where it crosses onto the paper, line up on the diagonal line. Ooh, it's right here at this other mark. So nice and light. And then I'm gonna fold it in half. I'm gonna add the half. And then I can come through, it's pretty much kind of straight, slightly curved. Okay, now I can come in and I can add in this bump out, okay? So what I would do is I'm gonna look, it starts to bump out that far down his face from the line. So that's what I'll measure from the line, and then half again. So it should start the bump out right there. And now I can measure the length of the bump out. So the bump out starts here and it ends right here. So there's the length, okay? So from here, here's my length and a half. So something that I notice is it's way above and not below. That is not correct. So I want to double check and see why. So I'm going to measure a different way. There's 1.5, which would put it only right here. So somewhere I kind of did not get that quite correct, that measurement. So we should be bumping out somewhere right in here. So again, that's what the grid is for. When you measure it out and you're like, oh, it's way farther below the line than it measured here, then you know you've measured something incorrectly and you need to double check it, okay? Now I will measure from below the line because it's almost even, so that's what I want it to be when I get done here. Okay, so it's gonna come off the face here, and it's gonna come back on the face here. But we wanna know how wide out it's gonna go, okay? So there's my how wide out. 1.5, And with this tiny distance, I kind of eyeball half. And then I know I want to come out that far. And I'll kind of smooth it all out. Erase that out. And it's gonna kind of look a little bit funky because you don't have any detail. So you kind of have to just go with it a little bit, do it very light, leave it there, get everything else in. Once you have the entire outline and you start adding detail, you can adjust the lines as needed. But this is getting our positioning and our proportion out, or laid out for us, all right? Okay, so from here, it now comes out and curves out and connects to that ear. We don't have an ear up here yet. At this point, for me, I would leave this section to the end. I would come back down here and measure out this, and then I would figure out this whole connection right here, okay? So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna come down from this end and I'm gonna add my little loop. So I'm going to find that intersection. So erase out any old marks on my blue paper so I don't have any confusion. My intersection is on this line, so I'm going to line my paper up with that line, and I'm going to mark where the ear comes right there, okay? Now I come over to the same line. Look at there, that's the 1. So, but we want 1.5. So let's fold in half. And that is where our ear is gonna come back up. And if you trace this, it comes down and then slants. So it's steep down and slants up. So that's what we're gonna do. And something that I would encourage is to double check how deep your curve went. Okay, that's how deep the curve is. If you come here and you put your pencil right here and then half again, you can see that I did get the curve deep enough. But when you're starting out, I mean, I have had lots of practice. When you're starting out, it's a very good idea to double check that you got your curve deep enough. And I still, even with lots of practice, I will go in and double check my curves often. Okay, so now I gotta figure out from here to there, which is a slight S curve. And I need this intersection. So that's the one I'm gonna measure next. And here it is. So I come onto the same line, make my light mark for my 1.5, or for my 1, I'm sorry, that's my 1 length. Fold that in half, add my half. So I have 1.5 times the length. This is where my ear needs to connect. It needs to slightly, very, very slightly S curve. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna come up and slightly curve out. Okay. So now I just need this line and this line, which means I need to find this point in order to close out his head and his ears, okay? So when we have a point that is not on the grid that we need, we have to do it with a 2-point measure, okay? So again, I'm going to place my pencil on that point, line the edge of my paper up with the line, slide it till it touches, and draw in the line to that point, okay? So you can see I have it, a line in there from the point out, and now I can measure up to that line. And then I will do the same here. I will measure up to it, which there's my 1. Fold this in half. And I will add my half. Okay, so that is where I need to start my measure in at, okay? So I will line the edge up with the line, and I will come down and I will make a mark where that point is, okay? And I will do the same. I will line it up with the edge of the line. Here's my 1 time. And this one, I'm gonna eyeball middle, and there's my point. So I have 1.5, and that's where my ear should close up and connect, okay? So from here to there is pretty much a straight line up, okay? And then to come down on the face, it's gonna curve, and then it's gonna be kind of straight. So we're gonna come up a little bit straight, and then we're gonna curve. Now, when you look at the sketch, it's all like, but if you look at his face over here, it's kind of like that, right? So even though it might look funky, I still want you to trust your measurements and go with it, okay? I'm gonna erase all my old marks. And we can continue along his body, okay? So I'm gonna continue down his arm. And I have a point where it comes out right at the edge where this bump out curve is, right there. That's where his arm's gonna come out, and it's gonna touch right there. So I'm going to measure that. If you notice, I'm putting the corner this time on here, and then I'm making my line at the edge of the grid. Either way is fine. It doesn't matter. It's still the length between the end of the grid and where the line intersects. And then we'll come over here. Here's my 1. Fold my paper in half. And add my half. And this is where his arm is gonna start to come down. I'll erase this old mark. And so now I want this curve of his arm, and I'm gonna measure to there. Okay? So I'm gonna line that up. One. I'll fold that in half. So now there's 1.5 times the length. That's where my arm will intersect. I'm gonna trace this to get the curve. So now I have his arm started. Okay, so again, we have this wrinkle here, and we can put the wrinkle in later. So right now I'm just going to create a smooth transition line, okay? Just like that. And that's what I'm gonna draw in for now. So my next intersection is right here. That's what I need to measure. So I unfold my paper, erase my mark, and I'm gonna put the corner down here at the bottom, line this up, and I'm gonna mark right there where it transitions across that line. However I line up my paper on this one is how I will line it up on this one. So there's my 1. Fold it in half. Mark that. Okay, so we have this little J that comes down and curves over. Okay? That's what we want. I'm going to erase out this old mark because now we want to figure out the distance of his paw right here, okay? So I'm going to be measuring this point. So I'm going to line this up with the corner. So there's 1. Fold this in half. Sometimes the paper doesn't want to bend quite where it's supposed to. Okay, there we go. And half. Add the half. We have 1.5 times the length. This is where his paw needs to come back across the line. Erase out that. Okay, so now it's gonna come out to here and then transition back. So this is a point that would be good to know, right? So this is not on a grid line anywhere. So what I would do is I would line up my straight edge, slide it over to that point, and draw a line, okay? So now I'm gonna measure the length here. I'm gonna line this up. Half. Add the half. Okay, so there's my 1.5, and this is where I need to measure up from. So unfold my paper, erase out my old line, and measure this. Okay? Here's 1. I'm gonna eyeball half, and here's my point. 1.5 times up. I can erase out these lines and dots and just keep that one because that is how I should curve it out to that. So curve it out and then curve it back this way. Okay. Curve it back out this way. Now I have this curve in, okay? Now this curves around and it just stops right there. I probably want this line. So that we need to figure out that one. And there's a line right here. It's really dark, so this one will be a little harder for you guys to see on the camera. Uh-oh, I dropped my blue paper on the floor. Okay, I got it. So I'm gonna erase out my line here. And I'm looking for this point again, so I'm going to line it up right here. Here's my point, and I'm gonna draw a line across. And of course, this is a very dark section of our image, so draw it, you know, I don't know if you guys can see it, but in person you'll have a little easier time seeing it, but it's difficult. It's dark right here, so, okay. Now I'm going to measure from that line down to this corner here. And that's what I'm going to do right here. And we're going to make this little mark. We're going to fold this in half. And we're going to add the half. And here's where I need to measure out from, okay? Which makes sense. It's a little distance from his mouth. It's perfect. And I will make the line even with the line of the grid so that I can line that up for my angle, to get my angle correct. And here's my 1. And then just slide it out for half because it's a small distance. And there's my half. So 1.5. This is where my arm needs to curve up to, and it's quite a curve. So I need to make sure I get quite a curve in there. And one of the things that I could do to double check that I made the curve go far out enough, here's my grid line. That's how close it is to my grid line. If I come over here and I put this here and then a half, I can see that I came up just about perfect on that, okay? So now I have his front paw in. I can work on the side of his belly here and his leg next, okay? So his belly's gonna come out on his arm. So I'm gonna wanna measure out how far down his arm and the belly starts to come off, okay? Now this line is a little bit curved, but we can get pretty darn close on that if we just come in. There's 1.5. So it needs to come off right about there, okay? I've got some extra marks in here. Get rid of them because all these extra marks get confusing. Okay, so right in here is where he's gonna come off, and then it's gonna come down and it's going to cross just to the outside of our X. So we actually, because we're so close to that X, we can just use that. And again, curves out. So curve it out. And then our next transition, if we look, the belly, it stops right here. Here's our grid line. Here's where our belly comes through. So we want to measure out on the foot. It's such a small distance that sometimes those are easier to estimate. But when you're starting out, I recommend that you don't estimate, that you actually measure. Because the more you measure, the more time you take, the better you'll get at being precise and being able to estimate. So in the beginning, you should definitely measure and double check. Okay, so now I have his belly in. So we can do his leg here. Okay, so his leg comes out from his belly down in here, and then it intersects right here. I'm gonna measure that spot first and get that here. So I'm gonna draw this line right here, and then I'm gonna line it up with that line. There's my one. I'm gonna fold it in half and add it. And that is where his leg should cross, okay? And it comes straight across to his belly right there. So you could kind of do that. Now, this point is gonna be an intersecting point. So we're gonna need a 2-point measure on that one. Okay, so we're getting this one. So if the best way to ensure that you get the correct angles is to line up the edge with the edge of whichever line of the grid you're gonna draw out to. Now I could also draw out to this one, and it might be a little bit shorter. So that's what I'm gonna do, okay? And it actually comes right up to where this one connected. So I can actually use that. We already have that mark. So there's my 1.5. So 1.5 the distance, and that is where my leg should, and it curves a little bit, okay? So as we come in, we're gonna curve it. There we go. Now we need this point. And then this line will come across and curve there, okay? So let's measure that spot. We're gonna do the same where we 2-point measure. We're gonna add a line. So now we need to measure down to our line. So if I go in the corner here, there's how far our line needs to go down. So we'll go in this corner. There is my, let's get rid of that old line. There's my one length, okay? Then we're gonna fold this in half because it's a little bit too long to estimate. And then we're gonna add that. And there's where we need to measure out from. Erase our old line on here. Measure out from there, lined up with the line. So we'll line it up with the line. Here's our mark. There's 1.5. Okay, so our other leg point, transition point, is right there. Okay. Now it curves and it goes past the line about double. So I'm gonna curve and go past the line about double. And then we're gonna have our toe. It touches the line right here on our grid. So that's our next point that we're gonna measure for, and then we're gonna curve the line up to touch there, okay? So, unfold my paper, my blue paper, erase out any old lines, and I'm gonna measure down, put that in the corner. Here's where it touches, add my line, okay? So we're gonna do the same over here. Here's our one, fold it in half. Bring it down. So that's where the toe needs to touch. Now, it's curving up and slanting back out, okay? So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna curve up and slant back out. I think it's not so fat and it's a little higher. So we'll adjust that. We'll come in and erase out some of that. I kind of got that in dark, so, okay. All right, I think that's about the right angle, so now it's in. His foot is in. Okay, so now we want to come down to here. So what I'm going to go ahead and finish out his foot. We want to come down to right here, and then we're going to want to come to right there. Okay, so I'm going to measure here, and then we're going to measure there. So I open my paper, I erase out my old lines. I'm going to place the corner up here, and here's where my foot crosses, okay? So now we come to the same corner, line it up like that. Here's where our foot crosses, that's the one time. Fold it in half and add half. So here's where our foot should touch the line, okay? So it curves, and then it kind of an S curve. Okay, so we're gonna curve like that. It's not an S, it's two curves. Curve and a curve. And now we just need this point to connect it to his foot. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna line it up with this line of my grid, and I'm gonna mark how far out this line touches on the foot, on his front foot, okay? And then that's what we're gonna do here. And there's 1.5, so it should touch right in there, okay? Now, when it comes straight and then it kind of curves up. It's almost like a little J. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna come and we're gonna curve up. And that gives us our foot. So now we have his front his front foot, his belly, and his hind foot.